Hey everybody, I'm Daryl Roy. I'm with 3D Media, and we have an excellent panel of subject matter experts for you today to discuss immersive tech in the energy, utilities, and field service industries. Now, before we start the discussion, let's meet all the experts. First, we've got Walter Davis. Walter, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Walter Davis. I'm head of talent and learning technology at Aggreko. Aggreko is a temporary power energy solutions provider. We have locations all over the world. And I look after both our talent and learning technology suite as well as sort of our leading the charge on our immersive technologies.
Great. Thank you, Walter. We also have today JB Farge, Jean-Baptiste Farge, the Subsea 7. JB, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hey Daryl. So I work for Subsea 7. We are a subsea engineering, construction, and services company. I'm an AXR solution manager, and so we're looking at introducing all this technology into that environment, and it's been doing this for about 2 years now.
Outstanding. Today on the panel, we've also got Ed Moore. Ed is with Chevron, and Ed's going to tell us a little bit about himself right now.
My name is Ed Moore. I've been with Chevron about 12 years. I currently lead the Industrial Internet of Things R&D portfolio for Chevron globally, and I'm actually moving into a new role as the Connected Workers Strategist for Chevron globally. So been doing AR, VR now for about 4.5 years, and we're going to hopefully be doing even more of that in the coming years.
Great. Thank you, Ed. And finally, last but not least, we've got Paul Daley with ConocoPhillips, right?
That's right. I'm with ConocoPhillips. I've been there for 6 years. I've been working with their VR initiative for about 3 years. My day job is that I'm an e-learning developer, so I stay in close touch with the high tech ways of delivering training, and VR is one of those ways that we're looking at.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, guys. Great introductions. We've got a couple of things that we really want to jump into, but before we get into those questions, I want to give you guys an opportunity to tell us and tell all those viewers out there a little bit about what you're working on, something that gets you excited, that you'd like to share with all the people that are watching. Walter?
Sure. I guess there's a couple of pieces that I'd call out that we've actually built here recently, a lot of it due to COVID. Some unexpected projects that have come up recently that I call out. So one, we've converted a lot of our physical face-to-face training to virtual delivery, and with that, has its own challenges and trying to overcome that. And to complement some of that training, we've developed 3D AR-based activity-based experiences that can be done during a virtual class as a separate activity. So they can still go through that face-to-face interaction with the instructor, but then they can jump into an AR activity, put it on their workspace, whatever they have at home, and get that spatial view of that component. And that's been something I think is quite exciting that we've done here recently to help to overcome some of these challenges. The other one I would call out is on our gas safety program. So we have an entry-level program that we put all of our technicians through to ensure that they know some of the basics on working safely on a gas site. They're not necessarily the ones repairing and everything, but they need to know some of the fundamentals of working safely, identifying leaks, etc. Some of the basic fundamentals of gas. So in that previous program, we had a practical assessment that they would have to go out to the piping. They'd have different scenarios in place, and they'd have to troubleshoot some of those scenarios to try to see when do I need to call that other high-level tech, or is there something I should notify someone about? And we've been able to actually bring that practical assessment in that what was a physical rig that we'd have in training centers sort of around the world, and actually bring it into AR, and they can place it in their living room. The instructor can see what they're doing. So it's like a remote AR sharing session, and they can go through that practical assessment. And actually, as of this week, we had just had it signed off too by our partners in the UK, who are authorizing bodies. So now we're allowed to deliver it and authorize our folks to go onto those gas sites and have a supporting certification behind it. So those are, I think, the two key ones I'd call out.
That's phenomenal, and I think one of the real commonalities between those two is the ability to, especially in this COVID era where everybody's socially distanced and quarantined, separated and isolated, the ability to bring the training environment to the individual, to their home, to the place where they are. Just the benefits there, thinking in terms of the cost savings, the risk mitigation. That's what all this is about, right? We're trying to mitigate risk, make things more efficient, and help people to be more proficient. And I think those are two phenomenal examples there, Walter. So that's exciting. That's great, man. Good job. JB, you want to talk about some of the stuff you're doing with Subsea 7?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'd call out would be with all the vessels that we have installing offshore pipeline. One of the key things that we're looking at now is to deploy wearables on each of the vessels that we have, which is something that, thanks to these travel restrictions, our teams and our senior management have seen the importance of doing remote inspection and remote assistance much more than they had before. So it's a very good thing to see that, to see the progress. It's much less about convincing now than actually installing and making sure the infrastructure IT-wise is here to support it. So that's something that gets me excited, having wearables on board the vessels. Yeah.
That's awesome. A lot of, the commonalities there are really cool. And I would suspect we'll probably hear some more when we talk to Ed about some of the exciting new things that you guys are doing at Chevron.
Yeah, so we've been working really mainly in augmented reality for about the last 4 years, really focusing on the HoloLens technology from Microsoft. Some of the key capabilities we've been delivering there is using their remote assist product. We're now able to pretty much transport any person anywhere in the world in a few minutes. So the business benefits there are just eliminating the travel, faster response times, time to resolution of issues. Now with COVID hitting, that really ratcheted it up a level because now we couldn't travel. And so this was actually became an ability to continue operations. Along with that, we had issues to where we have facilities that our partners are, manufacturing parts of our equipment in, and we couldn't go there at all. So what we've actually done here recently is, due to COVID, is we now just ship them a HoloLens device. They put it on, they connect into our environment, and we now are kind of virtually transported there. So the whole remote assist capability around inspections, factory acceptance testing, remote expert capabilities, just being able to be on site anywhere in the world for any person has been a key enabler for us. Some of the other areas that we've really been working in now more recently as we're evolving our capabilities is really the kind of the three-dimensional or the augmented work instructions. We also have what we call full-scale model reviews, where we can take our 3D design facilities, put them out in the field, see any issues we have there. And we also have some integration with our GIS and our Esri databases, being able to take that data, that's actually real-world data, and put that in place in the real world and see it. So really some very impressive capabilities are starting to come online with the technology as it matures. And we're also, it's really about kind of digitizing our world and also then bringing all our digital data back into the physical world. So it's that true round trip that we're really trying to progress here at Chevron.
Outstanding. And that's I think that's a key point here, right, is data, right? Because it's important to add that operational side of it, but we're really, we're missing an opportunity to add or to capture a lot of value if we're not pulling information and we're not reporting it back to different areas for compilation and aggregation of all that information from field data. Everything from troubleshooting information to life cycle of equipment, predictive maintenance, all that type of information. With the tools that you guys are describing, those are the that's the type of data that can really add a ton of value to the life cycle of an organization or asset or individual. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that, Ed. That's great. And Paul, let's hear about what we're doing at ConocoPhillips.
I would say we're much closer to the beginning of the journey compared to some of the other guys on the panel here. But what we've been focusing on has been mostly competency-based assessment type stuff, where we created a couple different scenarios. One setting was a control room. Another setting was an actual physical plant where we could simulate things going wrong that you wouldn't want to simulate going wrong in a real place, and then evaluate the learner going through that scenario. Like I said, we're much closer to the beginning. What we would like to see is to be able that an assessor would be able to evaluate remotely or through a non-VR type tool like a regular old laptop, that kind of stuff. But we haven't seen that implemented just yet. So we're looking at the kinds of things about assessing competency related to not having to take equipment offline, people out of their role longer than necessary, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Phenomenal. So the next question we've got is for Walter and Paul. So we talked about a lot of the challenges that COVID and the downturn in our industries have kind of had on us and the way that we operate. But even before that, you guys had challenges that you faced implementing this new technology, and you still face some of those in addition to the ones that were presented by world events. So what were some of those, and what ways have you found to overcome them or work around them? Walter, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think a couple of the challenges I'd say that that we'd faced weren't necessarily from the business wanting to have these solutions. A lot of the challenges that we'd faced were more in prioritizing and identifying which products, which learning modules, which elements make sense to do first. So I know we spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out, okay, which product should we focus on next? What makes the most sense? We'll get the most value across the board that we can use across the globe versus maybe a product that might be more regionalized. So we spent a lot of time working through that. I'd say that one of the things that I guess there's two other elements I'd call out as well. And I think the other one is, I mean, we do have a really big pull. And I think one of the things we're starting to see is it's a challenge to meet all the different use cases that come from the business and stay focused, and not deviate, right? Because it's really tempting to just, we could put together this quick little pilot and we could do it for you, but that's going to pull back your resources when you know that some of this technology can be applied so broadly, right? So that's been even just balancing that with some big stakeholders obviously that push to get their items in there. That has been I would say a challenge in balancing that effort out, as well as I would say on development. Still, I would say sometimes the development can take a little longer than we'd like. I would like to see some more maturity in some of the click to build, quick authoring, content conversion type things. I'd say those are also elements that we'd like to see mature a little bit farther to help us expedite some of this even quicker to the level of detail and interactivity that we want to get out of it. I think those are probably the two things that I would call out. Yeah,
and I'll tell you what, it's funny, in our experience, that first part that you mentioned and finding those critical evolutions is, finding the evolution that is critical enough that people can see the value, but simple enough to where it keeps their attention, number one, and that you can keep the cost of the pilot reasonable. That's a key factor in ensuring that we, all these projects and these initiatives don't stay in, that proverbial pilot purgatory place that everybody in the industry talks about. But I think those are key things, and it's a great point to bring up that is so important on so many levels, that a lot of people just getting into this industry or just breaking into it from a corporate perspective may not consider. So thank you for that. And what about you, Ed? Paul? What about you? What are some of the challenges you faced, and how'd you overcome them or work around them so far?
The challenges with my organization sound like the opposite of Walter's in that where it sounds like your company was just chomping at the bit to get a hold of the technology. Buy-in has been a bigger problem for me in terms of maybe a perception problem with the technology being associated with games and that sort of stuff first, rather than as a business tool. There's also, I think there's been some generational type issues in terms of adopting new technology. So I would say it's funny that I have to give credit to the thing that I'm going to say as a tool that I used to overcome that, but it was there was a call, basically a company-wide call for just new solutions of all sorts. They called it a Shark Tank sort of thing, and VR was pitched. And when finally the right person saw it, then there was a push or a pull from the top up, basically to pilot something and get something going. And before that, it had all been pushing up, if that makes sense. And that was much harder to do without a champion to say, yes, let's go ahead and put some real money into this and see what happens.
That's phenomenal input. The next question we've got is, it's actually right along the same lines, right? It's a little bit, it's more focused on the advice that you would have for people in your position, right? People in your position who are in an organization and they're trying to get VR and AR implemented. And I think you brought up some great points, Paul. And then to kind of piggyback right off of that, what's the advice that you'd have for them? What do you think some of the winning strategies are? And then on the other side, if you're a vendor, if the listeners are vendors, what advice do you have for them? What would you suggest for them to do, or just equally important, what would you suggest that they don't do? JB, why don't you start us off on this one?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because some of the stuff that we all been through is when starting this venture. First of all, the position that we are in now, that didn't exist before, at least in the oil and gas industry, that's for sure. So maybe some innovation position, but rarely. And so on my end, one of the things that I would advise people to do is definitely to get to know your budget cycle. So within your own company, as soon as you get to introduce new hardware, new purchases, and that project or corporate are going to pay, understand what's the budget cycle, who are the budget stakeholders in your region or in your discipline specifically, and also the second main point is get to know your IT, and not only your local IT, but also if multinational group corporate IT, because they support so much things. Like buying the hardware is one thing, but having supported throughout a couple of years is another thing. and you need their help from the get-go. So they'll be my two main advices.
Outstanding. And that's, the organizational communication and that place where everybody can work together. Because look, VR or AR or all these different tools, AI, machine learning tools, things like that, they're really useful siloed in these small groups. But for them to be most useful in an organization, you've got to have these groups, these disparate groups connected. You've got to have them able to communicate with each other. So, I mean, because otherwise you're speaking different languages. So, I mean, phenomenal input. Now, Ed, what advice do you have for those companies and those vendors who are trying to either implement immersive technology in their organizations or trying to develop new solutions and provide them to organizations like yours? What advice would you have for those individuals?
So for other companies like a Chevron that want to get into this space, there are a couple of key things I think you want to think about. One is you want to think big, but you want to stay focused initially. It's super important to have successes early on, to have people buying into that. And one of the key things that are going to enable you to be successful is to have local support and champions of the technology. So that was something we did very early on. But at the same time, we started, to JB's point, working very closely with IT to ensure we understood how we could scale this out. So how do we get to that 100, 200, 300 devices in the field within a few years to where all our business units can benefit from that? So, think large, focus initially, and then have a path on to scale, because it does take time to get organizations to support the technology. Also is look at technologies that are leveraging existing platforms and capabilities that your company has. So for us, one of the key enablers was we were moving towards Teams, and so using a product like Remote Assist, which integrated directly onto that, was super helpful, because we basically would buy a HoloLens, put Remote Assist on it, and it would connect into our entire Teams environment. So anybody in Chevron could call from that HoloLens to anybody else within Chevron. And then also working with the vendors And that's the other thing is I would say vendors partner with the companies you're working with to build in and solve the problems they're having. So we actually were able to influence Microsoft and get them to add capabilities which were important for us on the HoloLens for those remote assist calls that enabled and brought significant value. Also on the vendors is integrate into existing infrastructures, don't build your own. A lot of capabilities are already out there, cloud environments, authentication. Please try to use those because that just eliminates so many barriers to entry and allows you to quickly scale out.
That's a great point, Ed. You know, I think as vendors, a lot of times we kind of isolate ourselves and we try to build these solutions that fix or that solve every problem. And a lot of times we'll do that, and then we try to fit square pegs in round holes, and you know that's not helpful for anybody. So, you know, the final question we got here, and this is the $1 billion question, right? This could be the most important question that we've got in this whole panel. Where do you think this technology is going? Where should it go? And what do you think needs to change? What are the biggest barriers right now to successful application of virtual and augmented reality, you know, wide scale? And this question's for all of you. But we'll go ahead and we'll start with Paul.
Where I see it going, I think if any of you watched the Facebook stuff the other day, where they introduced the new Quest after taking the old Quest completely off the market, you can't even get it. You'll see that it's both cheaper, faster, and better just a year later. And so I think I don't know if we can count on that exact trend to happen year on year, but it might. And I think we'll start to see things getting smaller and faster and cheaper. And that's solving probably the biggest problem that I see with it is just kind of that ubiquity and wide adoption of the technology, where it's not just, you know, my cousin Pete is a nerd and he has a headset kind of thing, but it's everyone is used to wearing them at some point, or it gets small enough so that it's like kind of like those AR glasses that they're going to introduce next year, or something that just isn't that big a deal to either move out to the field. In our case right now, in terms of like moving a Quest out to a field location, I'm not really wild about doing that until it's a little more rugged than it is right now. But if it's so small that it doesn't matter if you drop it, that kind of thing, then I that will really solve a lot of this widespread scale size adoption kind of stuff that I'm thinking of. And yeah, I think smaller, faster, cheaper is where I see it going. And yeah, I think that'll solve the adoption problem that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. You know, it's funny, in the military that's called an attritable asset, right? Where it is so inexpensive or it's dispensable, right? So if it breaks or if it's no longer good, then just go get a new one. It's not a big deal. And I think you're right. I think for scale to happen, we've got it, and we could potentially get to this point where the hardware is essentially an attritable asset. We're not there now. It's going to be a little while, but I think you're right. I think you're absolutely on track there. Well, Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to actually build on your military discussion, is one of the things that gives us hope is the contract Microsoft has with the U.S. military, where they're basically building AR glasses. If you haven't read those articles, it's pretty scary what that's going to enable. And so, you know, one of the things we expect there is a lot of that technology will trickle down into into our industry. So things like military spec durability, higher classification ratings for hazardous environments for us, and just, you know, better overall capabilities for basically a field worker. So we feel that, you know, if it's going to work for an Army Ranger, it sure as heck should be able to work for somebody else on a platform. So, you know, to build on, as Paul was saying, smaller, cheaper, better. Those are kind of the three things. We kind of look at something like a mobile phone as being that evolution of the technology. It just keeps getting better and better. And then I think just the data sets that are out there, you know, one of the challenges we see is, you know, how much 3D data do we have? Do we have 3D laser scans of our environment? So, you know, finding ways to improve that back-end data set and then be able to leverage that into the field. I think that's going to be kind of what we see is if we look for a future digital worker, we really want them to be hands-free, working in the environment, be able to see all the data, all the information they need to do their job more efficiently and safer.
Yeah. And, I think, so the program you mentioned is called IVAS, the Army's, augmented reality program. And I think you're absolutely right. When you see those type of investments and those type of advances coming from the Defense Department, and you see that the data where it all kind of meets, right? And it's the same thing in industry where all that data's got to meet. That data's got to come together somewhere. And in the military, they call that the ABMS, the Advanced Battle Management System. It's where all the, where the sensors and shooters meet, right? So, but that's, great points. And there are a lot of parallels right there between industry, defense, and then all that information there that goes along with that. So, JP, what you think, man?
So one of the improvement that I'm looking for is the fact to move some of the graphic processing into the cloud. So at least we won't be, especially for VR in some of the design reviews, instead of having or have to have like all your teams with like spec'd up computers, having an availability of having a software that able to process all the heavy scenes on the cloud, and then being able to access it from a web portal is something I'm looking forward to. It's a little bit more dedicated to what we're doing, but it is definitely something that will help us push VR and having more acceptance of VR. Because it's truly since the era of COVID-19, AR took a big acceleration. But on our case, VR is a bit lagging in that sense because everybody's so spread out. Not everybody has a headset, not everybody has a computer that can work those VR scenes. It's a little bit harder. If they had access to a web portal, regardless of their computer specs, it would be much easier. So that's what I'm looking forward, definitely.
Awesome, man. Awesome. I love the cloud, the cloud render, the remote rendering idea. I think you're right. I think that's going to be, the ability to take those large data sets like what Ed was talking about, the point clouds and the 3D models and the proverbial digital twins, and actually render those remotely on the edge is going to be, and you see it happening now. There are companies out there that have that capability to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to build on, I was just going to build on that real quick. One of the industries that's going to help us, which has helped us in VR, right? Without the gaming industry, we wouldn't have the VR we have today, right?
Yeah.
And so with the streaming that JB's talking about, that's coming with the Google streaming platform and the Microsoft game streaming platforms that are out there where, if they're able to stream a 4K video game image to me and I can interact with it and play it at, basically millisecond level of latency, then that's going to be more than enough for what we need. So we're really hoping those technology improvements are going to basically migrate over into our environments as well.
Oh, they absolutely will. I think you're dead on. Absolutely. Walter, what you think about all this?
Yeah, so I piggyback off of really a lot of what everyone said. I think sort of the biggest factor for me, I think that's going to drive really a lot of that underlying technology is when we start to drive that social acceptance of the technology and the wearable, right? So I think sort of like Paul mentioned, the new headset coming out, cheaper, faster. I think we get smaller. So as soon as we start to get those more as something that we can really use, for long periods of time during a day, as a technology that we can, wear for long periods of time, interact with for extended periods of time in different locations, really, as we're on the go. I think that a lot of that social acceptance, if you would, is going to start to drive that change and say, okay, well, now we're reaching that desktop worker, we're reaching that other worker. And all those underlying technologies that would be needed to drive that, I think are gonna benefit us in our industries as well. So even whether it's driving sales and even on the commercial side or more on the public sales, et cetera, I think a lot of those, like I said, underlying technologies that would drive a consumer to purchasing a product in AR or VR, we're going to be able to leverage some of that as well within our industries. So I think that's sort of one of the biggest factors that I'd see, and where I'd see that we're going to get a lot more of a real pull. Like, why don't we have this? We use this in our day to day now, right? So we wear these glasses to now navigate through the streets. or whatever, right? And so why can't we just use that? I think as the technology grows and the acceptance of it, I think that's going to be a huge factor in bringing this even broader.
Yeah, I mean, form factor is huge, right? Even
Yeah.
you think about the men and women who are working in the field for all of your companies. Think about some of the previous iterations of augmented reality in the field. And think about, even some of the current ones, if we're going to be honest, and the form factor associated with that. People don't understand this. They don't realize it. I was in operations for 10 years. As much as blue collar as that profession is, like, style kind of does still matter a little bit, right? And so you don't want to be out there looking like a complete fool while you're trying to do your job, right? So the form factor does matter. And obviously the most important part of that is, is it class 1 div 2 rated in many cases? Is it ruggedized? Is it, is it capable of working in these environments, hot, cold? You guys touched on some of those. Those things have got to all be a part of it. But a lot of what's lacking right now, whether it's, one piece of hardware being really steampunk driven, no operator's going to wear that in the field, or another one that's just massive. It provides challenges. It creates challenges to rapid deployment. But it's getting there. And the great thing is that every single one of these hardware companies, they understand that, I think. I think they do. I think they understand that. And they also see the need for putting that time into form factor and that time into ruggedizing these pieces of kit to put into the hands of the end users that you guys are building this for. You think back to one of the first pieces of hardware that was out there. They had a nice little term for people who would wear them out on the street, right? They called them glass holes, right? And so that was the perception, but you're right. That social acceptance of it, because you can't really imagine a mom in a grocery store wearing the steampunk headset or the other headset that's really prevalent. It's not there just yet. But I think, like maybe JB mentioned, or I think JB mentioned this, is that there's a company that's going to be releasing a much more slim design in the next year. That's really encouraging for wide deployment of all these type of technologies. It's exciting. So those are pretty much the questions we've got. And so we're going to wrap up the panel. What I'd like to do is I'd like for each of you to give something to the audience. One thing that you want to tell them as we go, one thing that is just absolutely imperative that you feel like is important that the people out there are going to want to know. And I'm not going to go in order. I'll let somebody first raise their hands and drop that. Okay. What you got?
Prepare for rejection. Prepare for the no's, because they're going to come.
Yeah, no doubt. From every side, internally and as a vendor, right? Yeah. Awesome. Ed, what you got, man? What do you think is that key piece of advice right now, like last thing you want to drop to the audience?
If you're starting new, find a champion in the business unit, somebody who is acceptable to new technology. They're willing to understand that there are going to be rough edges on it early on, and work with them, work with your vendors, work with your partners, basically resolve those rough edges before you roll it out to a broader audience who might not be as open to technologies that aren't polished.
Outstanding. Paul, drop some knowledge on us, man. Give us some wisdom.
When you find your champion, you're going to need to show that person value for bringing this technology into the company with some identified pain points that adopting the technology will solve or diminish or make positive in some way that they value. A lot of times it's money, but sometimes it can be other things too, like better safety results, that sort of stuff. So value and tying pain points, that kind of stuff.
Great. And Walter?
Yeah, I mean, I think the champion one I think was a really good point. I really like that point. I think the other one I'd add to that is ensuring that whatever you're looking at, whatever you're starting with, that you're ensuring that it's not going to be that shiny object, and you can grow with it quickly. Because as soon as you get that buy-in, they're going to want it the next day. You're going to need to know what are the next steps to going big. So, and you don't want to, you want to make sure that the companies you're partnering with, the solutions you're looking at, that they're going to not just fit whatever that niche pilot is that you might be doing, but you're going to be able to quickly grow with them. And there's something that you can use for your broader use cases and your broader audiences.
Outstanding. Guys, these are some great answers. Now, look, I've asked a lot of questions. Okay. I've really put you guys on the spot. But now it's time for the audience to go ahead and start with a QA. Any questions that you've got for us, any member of the panel or myself, go ahead and shoot. Send them to us right now, and we're going to answer them for you.